Deal.
Hello, everybody. Great to see you guys. Thanks for tuning in. We got just about 300 people watching now. Make sure that you've hit the like button. YouTube, especially at this time, is not very fond of independent adversarial outlets, so they try to bury us in a cave. So it helps with the algorithm. We're going to talk about Russia, Ukraine, and much more. But to do that, I got a very special guest with me here, Pepe Escobar, which I'm sure you've all heard of. He's the editor-at-large at Asia Times, independent geopolitical analyst who's focused on Eurasia. He's also a columnist at The Cradle. And, Pepe's been a professional foreign correspondent for, 37 years now, all over the planet. Pepe, thank you so much for coming on. It's really great to have you. How are you?
Well, thanks for having me. So let's have a assalamu alaikum, because I'm in Istanbul. And my old roots back there, Hawaii from Thailand.
That's great. That's great. And these are exciting times, both in a positive way and a negative way. The world is shifting. We're having a real global realignment. And I couldn't think of a better guest to have on. Pepe, could you maybe bring us up to date, up to speed on what's happening in Ukraine? You were tweeting earlier that, the Russian forces have encircled the Ukrainians. We also saw that Russia is telling people to evacuate the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. There was also a tower that was hit earlier, which you tweeted about. Just bring us up to speed on all of this. What are your thoughts?
Well, we have the cauldron in the east, which is practically finished, which in terms of a military operation is something that is going to be studied in military academies for decades. Forces from the baby twins, as I call them, Donetsk and Lugansk, advancing westward, the Russians coming from the north, and they are encircling what's probably going to be at least 12 Ukrainian brigades, or maybe even more, in a giant cauldron, and they have nowhere to run. So either they depose their weapons, or they're going to be simply exterminated. Simple as that. This is something that is going to happen in the next few days. So the pincer movement is practically done from the north, from the west, and from a little bit from the south as well. So there is for the moment, something like 50 kilometers until it's closed. And even now with this, let's say this gap of 50 kilometers, they cannot leave, because if they do, they're going to be bombed to smithereens. So this is the first part. The second part is what's happening in the southeast. As of today, in fact, Ukraine has zero access to the Sea of Azov, because the forces that were coming from the baby twins on the south, and let's say parallel to the Sea of Azov, they met with the Russian forces that were coming from the west. They came from Crimea. And that is already definitively Novorossiya land, all the way from the baby twins to Crimea. This is a major geopolitical development. And the next part is going to be when the Russian forces will start to advance westward from Crimea, because they are already taking Kherson. Okay, there are many battles in Kherson. It's essential, but it's the bridge to go further westwards towards Odessa. And then all the way to the border with Transnistria. This means that sooner or later, exactly, this is the best military map we have as it stands on the net anywhere. It's by a professional military topographer. But it only concentrates on the eastern part, close to the baby twins. What we're going to see in the next few days and weeks is a Russian progression across, parallel to the Black Sea, all the way to Odessa, and all the way to the border for the moment, the Ukrainian border with Transnistria. And the third major front is north of Kiev. Kiev is completely encircled by now from the north, from the east, and from the south. And there is a humanitarian corridor open towards the west, which is what the population of Kiev has been encouraged. You want to leave? No problem. You just drive or walk or take a bus or whatever west. which means towards Lviv, if they want, or towards Poland, if they want it as well. This means NATO territory. So
Right.
the fact that the Russians managed to accomplish all that in a matter of less than a week, in terms of the military competence of the Russian armed forces, is something absolutely staggering. And even American analysts, comparing to the advance in the post-shock and awe 2003 invasion and occupation of Iraq. Well, I remember I was there. In fact, I hooked up with the Americans coming from the south when I was in Baghdad already. And it took them 23 days to advance from the Kuwaiti border to Baghdad. And they had zero resistance because they were traveling and advancing in the south of Iraq, which means Shiite territory where they were even embraced, or at least people were looking at them, okay, you may go. So it's a completely different situation. There's no comparison at all. The Russians are in most cases, apart from the line of contact, extremely hostile territory. And they manage. And they are applying, very, very important from a military point of view. This is something that you won't hear in the US for that matter. They are applying less than 10% of their forces. And in terms of lethal weaponry, nothing. Literally, no hypersonic missiles, no Buratino flamethrowers, nothing. It's just standard equipment. It's not their top forces at all. You have some Spetsnaz near Kiev, of course, some coordinating in Mariupol, some coordinating in Kharkov, but it's just a few. And the bulk of the troops are in fact inside Russian territory, where they were until a few days ago. They continue to be. So in terms of, and this is something that you don't see analyzed in detail in the West, because most people don't even know how to start. You see it in Russian military analysis blogs or channels on Telegram, for instance, with maps, showing meaning what they say, etc. So in terms of what I would qualify as a massive police operation, because this is what it is for the moment. This is not an invasion and occupation force. This is a police operation. And this was specified in detail by Putin himself and by everybody else, Gerasimov, Chief of Staff, Defense Minister Shoigu, Lavrov, the whole Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's an operation for demilitarization of Ukraine, obviously, and denazification, which is going to be a very complicated long-term affair, right? And of course, all that is inextricably linked to the key demands expressed by Moscow towards the Americans, towards NATO, towards Kiev for months. And nobody, of course, listened, which means, I'll repeat the obvious for all of you. I'm sure all of you are aware of it. Ukraine has to declare its neutral status. No foreign weaponry in Ukrainian soil. Recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk, and the end of their harassment, shelling, bombing, etc. And then that's it. These are the basic conditions for the end of the massive police operation. Obviously, from the point of view of NATO, and especially from the point of view of his master's voice, the Americans, all of that is anathema. So what they're doing, they're stalling, essentially. This could have been solved by a phone call in the beginning of the massive police operation. Nothing happens. They had the first meeting in Belarus where absolutely nothing happens. They're going to have the next meeting maybe tomorrow. We still don't know. And nothing's going to happen because basically the Americans will have to concede that they lost Ukraine if they accept all these demands. So, and it's also completely absurd because the more they stall, the more this thing drag, Russia gets more and more stronger on the terrain. But in terms of the cauldron in the east already, in terms of the Sea of Azov already, in terms of the encircling Kiev already, and obviously further west towards the parallel to the Black Sea in the next few days.
But Pepe, everything you're telling us here is in direct contradiction with what we're hearing in the West. They say that the Russians are bogged down. It's already a quagmire. Let me show you.
It's a quagmire. Everything went wrong. Putin is incompetent. Gerasimov is going to be fired. No, it's for comic relief. If you are in NATO-stan, as I call it, and I mean everywhere, the sort of analysis that you see in European media, it's there's no other way to look at it except laughing.
Let me show you this tweet from Andrew Neil. He says that.
Oh man, you chose a wonderful creep.
I especially. He says they're suffering from poor morale. The Russians, they don't have any fuel. There's food shortages, and they. He says they've surrendered. The war's over, I guess. Then the Russians have surrendered. I mean, that's incredible.
What the hell does he know? He's sitting in a bloody office in London. He's probably still living in London.
Yeah.
And obviously, all these creeps who live in London and work for British media, that's all they do, and it's a very small bubble, and always the same people.
It is, and but here, another one I saw is from the Ukrainian defense minister. They say they've destroyed 140 Russian tanks. Other people say 200. What is this? In 5 days, 200 Russian tanks. I mean, what is this, World War II? It's ridiculous.
Yes, they make it up, just like they make up all these. Grannies with Kalashnikovs, that kind of shit, everywhere. But this is what the Americans have been doing for decades. It's back to the babies in incubators in Kuwait. It's the same story. The CIA and everything around the so-called lack of intelligence community, as my friend Andrei Martyanov memorably put it, they only have one playbook. And even worse, Richard, the playbook applied in Afghanistan from the beginning of the 80s throughout the jihad until 1998 is now going to be reproduced ipsis literis, assuming that these people even will be allowed to arrive in Ukraine. They are setting up an international mercenary neo-Nazi brigade being trained in Poland by essentially CIA supervision, but by professional military trainers from professional military companies like especially Blackwater Academy. The guy who actually sold this idea to the CIA is, of course, who else? Eric Prince. And Eric Prince have been, for the past 3 months or so, if I'm not mistaken, since November last year, he's been advertised, his company now is based in Hong Kong. He's been advertising that his idea is to create a mercenary force to engage in hybrid war against Russia in different parts of, from Ukraine to Central Asia. So we have the same thing that happened in Afghanistan. Now, instead of having a Jihad Inc., we're going to have a neo-Nazi Inc.
Basically,
it's impossible for them to think outside the box because they live inside the box completely. The whole lack of intelligence apparatus. So it's impossible for them to even imagine something even more creative in terms of destabilizing or psyops. And the psyops that they do is psyops for dummies, literally. The stuff that we already know, even before we look at it, that is a psyops. The problem is, for Western public opinion that is completely, to use a Tibetan term, discombobulated, totally lost in space and time because of the 2 years or so of COVID, because of all the restrictions, because of the extinction of the middle classes everywhere, because especially of the extinction of critical thought and debating based on rational ideas instead of following narratives. It's very easy to indoctrinate these masses. Very easy. So they keep applying the same playbook because, first of all, because they don't have to think about anything else, and second, because it's easy.
Yeah, I mean, it's so childish. They make it all about like, oh, Putin is some, evil maniac who wasn't loved as a child. Like, they just remove the entire geopolitical context, and that's enough because it's tailored for dummies, as you just put it, and they eat it up. It's absolutely staggering.
You're right, Richard. The problem is, and I see it as a much more perverse problem compared to the US, where most people are depoliticized and they live, of course, all of us who lived in the US know about the steady 24/7 diet of trash that they are, ingurgitating every day. But even in Europe and among so-called progressive, deep thinking and politicized populations in places like Germany, like France, like Italy, most of the masses are also falling for it. Yeah. And this is the real. I've been discussing this with friends in Germany, in Italy. In France, it's impossible. I don't even try to have a conversation in France because the French are completely blocked, totally blocked. But in Italy and in Germany, for instance, analysts that are, of course, outside of the mainstream, academics, they are marginalized, etc. They are absolutely appalled, especially in Germany, because the other day we were trying to laugh about it. And we came to the conclusion that Putin, the Germans owe something to Putin. And it's, in historical terms, is quite impressive. Putin managed the Germans to get off their World War II culpability complex. Now they can openly embrace Nazis again. So the denazification company launched by Putin in Ukraine, the first serious practical consequence that we're seeing right in front of us is the re-Nazification of Germany. Yep. Can you imagine this for people who had their parents fighting Nazism in Germany at the time? And, progressive German intellectuals that grew up in the 60s or in the 70s. They don't know. Look, not even tons of Hegel and Nietzsche together with a sprinkle of Adorno, Horkheimer, and Benjamin, they can explain something like this. It's impossible.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just that, but also the, this embrace, this open embrace of neo-Nazis, also in the UK, like the foreign secretary is saying, go and join these foreign fighters. We support you. I mean, I'm shocked. I'm not surprised, but I am disgusted by it. And I think one of the things with Germany also, which is really interesting, is they've also forsworn their previous stance, where it's basically like, we're not going to send weapons, we're going to stay more, quote unquote neutral. Although I think Yemen would beg to differ. And it's has that surprised you with how they've committed to NATO now, like Trump wanted?
Yes, Richard. We were all surprised by the speed that they absolutely caved. Starting with that famous press conference Biden shows in Washington. You remember, nah?
Yes, of course.
Where Biden's earpiece, because at the probably there was not a teleprompter for that press conference. The earpiece told Schultz, "We can cancel Nord Stream 2 anytime we want it." And you have the German chancellor standing there like a cold cucumber, and he said absolutely nothing. So that was the first sign. Of course, there are plenty of other signs afterwards, but the latest sign is that, in a flash, he commits to double the budget of the Bundeswehr out of the blue, money that they don't have, by the way, to, okay, let's start a really competent German fighting force, which, by the way, they don't have. Don't forget that absolutely unspeakable mediocrity, von der Leyen, which all of us are calling von der Lügen. Lügen is lie in German. Yeah. So von der Lügen, she was Minister of Defense. Consider the worst Minister of Defense in German modern times. I'm sure you know about that, Richard. And probably many of you watching. And the Bundeswehr was already decimated. And now this idiot, the cold cucumber, plans to resuscitate it in a flash, buying, of course, American weapons for the next 2 or 3 months, not with a not with a discount, of course. And what is going to do about it? Is it going to send the Bundeswehr through Poland to invade Russia like a famous guy did in the early 1940s? So it's pathetic. You know, the only way to deal with these people is Monty Python. You have to, everything they say is an instant Monty Python sketch. You know.
I swear it's so comical. It's really like watching clowns in real time. And I'm sure another comedian, I don't mean Zelensky, I'm talking about Keir Starmer. You know, he's saying now that if Labour MPs express, you know, they show criticism of NATO, that they'll be kicked out of the party. I mean, you could, that not even Tony Blair did that during Iraq. It's really
right. You're right. Yes. And well, and then we get to the really very, very serious aspects of the whole circus, kabuki, or performance, which is the criminalization of dissent mixed with Russophobia and mixed with racism. They are all intertwined, of course.
Yep.
So the racism against Arabs, especially, and Chinese, which was very, very profound, now merge into Russophobia. And they are making direct comparisons. They are detrimental to both, to Slavs and to Arabs. They say, for instance, like now it's becoming a mantra, especially in the US. Oh no, Ukraine is a civilized country. They are blonde, blue eyes. They're like us. They are not those piece of places that we invaded before, you know, Iraq, Libya, all those things. You know. And this is being said openly,
right,
all across the US media, and some in Europe, and I've seen already instances in France and in Germany, are reproducing the same thing.
It's masked off.
And exactly. And there's a sort of innate Russophobia in many places in Europe. In the case of France, it's something extremely subtle. But I was discussing with some French analysts the other day. So, okay, people, we can still have a conversation. And one of them told me something extraordinary. So, of course, we never got rid of Napoleon. So they're still jealous and angry with Russia. Because Napoleon was, obviously 200 years ago, was vanquished not by General Winter, but by Russians. So this is the French aspect to it. Obviously, Germans and Russia, we all know the precedents, especially the latest one 75 years ago. But in the case of Italy, for instance, you see the owner literally of Draghistan going to the Senate in Rome and basically issuing a declaration of war against Italy. Consider that relations between Italy and Russia have always been friendly, at least for the past 75 years, and during all the gestation of the European Union. It's completely absurd. And most Italians don't say anything about it. You won't read that in mainstream Italian media at all. You know, Corriere della Sera, La Stampa, the main papers, which are all owned by Fiat, by the way. So we can call it Fiat media in Italy. There's nothing else, you know. And you see some of the best academics from Trieste, for instance, which understand Eastern Europe well, from Venice, from Rome. They are completely silenced and marginalized.
Yeah,
it's beyond Kafka in so many aspects. And for all of us who grew up, who lived, or who have family in Europe, it's inadmissible, something like this. And this is something that we'll never expect will happen so fast and all over the spectrum as it is now.
Yeah, this Russophobia, just this jingoism that you're seeing now about like, it's us Europeans, us civilized people, and you know those orcs over there. Is the you saw that the Ukrainian National Guard calling the Chechens orcs, and of course the Iraqis and Afghans, they're uncivilized. It's really uncivilized. Again. You expect them to have those kinds of feelings and resentment, but to say it like just on television now, like it's been so commonplace, is incredible. And I think the slandering and silencing of academics, as you mentioned, it's just all across the board, right? It's the RT, for example, they shut down RT. Academics also going after politicians, even people who criticize NATO. It's like, we'll just silence you as a Putin puppet, or you're a Kremlin asset. I mean, even the CIA director was saying that this is a red line for Moscow. Is he also a Kremlin agent? You know, they act like this is a Kremlin talking point that was invented yesterday, and that this hasn't been a real fear that Russia's had for 30 years now. It's really incredible. What did you think about the RT ban? They took RT off YouTube completely.
Yes, I'll answer your questions. First, one thing, Richard. Russians personally, all over NATO stand, are being criminalized just because they are Russians.
Yep.
So there is no other evidence of neo-fascism that is more startling than this one.
Yep.
There's absolutely nothing that compares to it in post-modernity. Okay. All right. We had this before against Iraqis, against Syrians, against Libyans, and now to pick up their own perverted logic, well, they are blonde and blue and green eyes, just like us as well. But they're Russians, so this means they are Untermenschen, which is Nazi terminology once again, or as my friend the Staker put it, also memorably, snow niggers. This is an excellent, ultra hardcore expression to qualify how the Beltway especially looks at Russians.
Yeah.
They don't look at Russians as people. They look at Russians in general, and I'm not talking only about the military or the Putin circle or whatever, as snow niggers. We have to go there and take over those rich lands. They don't deserve those lands. So it's crazy, because history always tells us stuff that is basically underneath, and then when you get to a point of inflection, of explosion, it bubbles back on. It's in the collective unconscious, and then we have something like this that it starts a new paradigm, and the past goes back. James Joyce used to say, the nightmare of history. No, this was the unconsciousness of history that is bubbling up all over again. In fact, it started. I would say it started at least 100 years ago, even before. It started in the case of the Anglo elites. It started with the Great Game at the time in the late 19th century, and then when Mackinder 100 years ago invented, let's put it this way, sort of a geopolitics, was still a great game operation. And the whole thing that the Anglo-American elites are still hostages of Mackinder. Because for them, it's the same old story. We need to control the heartland. If we don't, we are islands. And they are. UK and US, they are island nations. If they don't control the heartland, they're going to be in serious trouble. So this is the basis of their foreign policy for the past century, in fact. And now this whole thing is collapsing. Because after we had all the descendants, Spikeman, Mahan, Kissinger, Brzezinski, saying that we have to prevent the emergence of a peer competitor in Eurasia. Now we have the ultimate nightmare plus two. We have the emergence of the strategic partnership peer competitors. And what is the reaction of the Anglo-American elites? I wish Bismarck was alive to define these clowns. The most absurd strategic blunder in the history of modern politics, or even ancient politics. You create a war on two fronts against the strategic partnership at the same time. I cannot think of anything more stupid than that. And these are people who, in thesis, have PhDs, receive enormous salaries sitting in the Beltway, etc. They conduct policy reunions at the National Security Council, all that crap. These people come up with something like this.
Real geniuses,
So
yeah.
they are absolutely. So we have to be startled at, wow, really?
It's a gift in a way, because I think one of the aspects, the economic aspect of it, of trying to attack Russia with SWIFT, and especially the central bank, you know, I think you've expressed this viewpoint, and so have I. This is ultimately going to backfire because, you know, we're entering a new phase. This is no longer 1991. Yeah. What do you think is going to happen in terms of Russia seeking alternatives with China when it's with its neighbors in Eurasia?
It had already started, Richard, years ago. The number one issue is bypassing the dollar. This is a serious discussion that started within the BRICS, still in the late 2000s, and then continued in the early 2010s until 2015-16 especially. At the time, Lula was president of Brazil. He was very instrumental in conducting part of this discussion with Putin and then Medvedev and with Hu Jintao. So this is, I would say it's a Brazil, Russia, China initiative, in fact. And then obviously the Russians and the Chinese start thinking along their own lines. Okay, how are we going to do it inside Russia? How are we going to do it inside China? And even before, they were already thinking of, okay, the Russians have their own payment system, and the Chinese have their own. That's SPFS in Russia and chips in China. So even before what's happening now, they already say, okay, we need probably to merge our two payment systems. And then we're going to have a post-SWIFT mechanism. We start with both of us. We choose a currency, which is probably going to be the yuan. And then soon we're going to have Iran, we're going to have Pakistan, we're going to have the Central Asians and other countries in the global South, Africans, Southeast Asians, etc., because Eurasia Economic Union has deals with ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And then we're going to have a great deal of the global South on board. Yep. So, and now what's going to happen with the sanctions? It's going to accelerate a process that was already ongoing, but it was relatively slow. So what's going to happen maybe in the next few months? We can have an announcement by Moscow and Beijing together that they are merging their payment systems, that it's going to start not even on an experimental level, because it's already on an experimental level. For instance, you have a lot of banks that are linked with the Russian system, including some foreign banks, and a lot of banks who are linked to the Chinese system. You merge them. Yuan is going to be, which in terms of the internalization of yuan, is something that the Chinese authorities really want, is going to be perfect. It's what they need in one of the next few steps. And soon we're going to have it spread all over Eurasia, because then it's an accumulation of factors of trains going to the same direction. Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Eurasia Economic Union, the New Silk Roads, the Belt and Road Initiative, and obviously the BRICS Bank, the Silk Road Fund. So, okay, so now we have a payment mechanism that suits all of us and will be used for our intra-trade and for our trade with other regions as well. Countries in West Asia are going to be tempted as well. So this, like my last column that came out today talks about this, but as a sort of prelude, it's something that needs to be examined in detail further on down the road. But some of the people quoted in this column say that this is the beginning of de-dollarization in practice. Practice, and even the Americans know that. Like Bloomberg talked to some economists, and the guys who know how to think in terms of Eurasia, they said exactly the same thing. Of course, they put it in very comfy terms. It could be a threat to the predominance of the dollar, which is basically saying, the dollar will be going down fast. That's what it is.
I mean, they really do. It really does look like they're shooting themselves in the foot.
Yes.
They have. I sense a lot of arrogance in the short term. They think that everything is a done deal and the whole world is turned against Russia and so on and so on. But long term, I mean, it's looking quite different. And Yeah, in terms of the targeting of the Russian central bank, what do you think that the Russians are going to do to mitigate the damage to the ruble? Because they've been, this is all over the front pages that it's down 30% and it's in ruins. What do you think?
They were expecting hardcore sanctions, of course, and they were prepared for it. They were expecting devaluation of the ruble, everything. They're going to announce their counter sanctions, which some of us are thinking is going to be the mother of all counter sanctions after the State of the Union address by the ERP's cum teleprompter. And then we're going to see where this is going. Medvedev already said something that maybe it's pointing to the way. He said basically that everything is on the table.
Yeah.
And that everything is on the table includes, I would say, the nuclear option, which is seizing energy deliveries to all countries that are deemed hostile, which is a great deal of the European Union, if not all the European Union customers of Russia. If they do that, this is the mother of all counter sanctions. Yeah. I'm not sure they're going to get that far in the beginning, even considering the rhetoric and even considering that the European Union has, for all practical purposes, in the words of those idiots in Brussels, but also in the words of the French Minister of Finance, Bruno Le Maire, who said yesterday that their aim is to destroy the Russian economy. This is a declaration of financial and economic war, no question. Yeah. The Russians are much more subtle. They're going to go, they're going to go to the jugular for each individual nation that they deem hostile. And probably they're going to have targeted counter sanctions for each different nation. Probably not specifically towards the European Union, because they know that the European Union is a joke. They know that Brussels essentially is run by a bunch of bureaucrats who, have fabulous pensions, who are totally incompetent, unelected. They have no traction with European populations, and they are just over there following orders from the invisible masters that most of us already know, so they're not invisible anymore. So let's wait for the mother of all counter sanctions. It's going to be really brutal. And the foreign ministry already gave a few hints from yesterday to today, the same thing. And in terms of what matters for the Russian is not much more than the counter sanctions, is how to stabilize their economy, which means that they should start listening to Russian economists who had been saying, we need to prop up our own industries and cut off our dependence on imports. This is essential. So I think this now is going to be finally implemented across the spectrum. You don't need, for instance, to have a camembert in a Russian supermarket when you have excellent Russian cheeses. Very simple example, something that Iran did for 4 decades, and it worked for Iran. It can also work for Russia. In fact, it has been working for Russia, import substitution, since 2014. They have been under sanctions since 2014, and they reorganized parts of their economy, at least. Now, this thing is going to accelerate. And of course, closer integration with their Eurasian partners. This means not only China, but Southeast Asia, which means the Eurasian Economic Union having more deals with Southeast Asian nations, with Pakistan, with Iran, of course, with a lot of countries in West Asia as well, even with Turkey. Why do you think Turkey refused to sanction Russia? This was decided today, by the way. The Minister of Foreign Relations, after a lot of back and forth, today they said, no, we're not going to sanction Russia. Because Turkey depends on Russia for a lot of stuff, not only oil and gas, for nuclear power plants, tourism, you name it. So obviously, it will be counterproductive for Turkish interests to sanction Russia. So Russia, in terms of their margin of maneuver, in terms of trade and commerce, etc., is the whole of Eurasia, not to mention Africa and Latin America. So, in terms of the planet, Russia, in their minds, they already convinced that they have to forget about the West as a whole. Even if this thing maybe will last a few years or a decade or two, it doesn't matter for them, they don't need it. And there's nothing that the West has that they need. The Russian economy, essentially, they can get from their Eurasian and Asian partners. So this is another, I would say, milestone in terms of we are already living in a separated world. It's going to be NATO stand on one side and Eurasia development and integration on the other side, and people are going to have to choose their camp. As simple as that. And a lot of people who are dissatisfied in the West, they will probably migrate somewhere in Eurasia to restart their lives, restart their careers, or even start their careers. Or if they are prisoners of conscience in the West, considering that there's only one narrative in the West, and if you don't follow it, you are criminalized all over the place. People are going to start moving to all points east, let's put it this way.
Yeah. And I mean, you just mentioned Turkey. I was going to ask you actually about Turkey saying it's not going to sanction Russia. As you mentioned, they're dependent on Russia for many things. In terms of closing the straits, Turkey said it would be activating the Montreux Convention of 1936. I wanted to ask you about this. Do you think that they did this only after the Russian ships had already passed so they could kind of appease both sides, both NATO and Russia? That's the game. You
got it, Richard. You got it. 100%. Of course, they know that they are threading a very, very fine line here. This is something that, in fact, very important information that I learned only a few weeks ago. I've been here for a month or so. In my second week, I had a fantastic meeting with some top analysts, and I confirmed and reconfirmed a key point, that 90% of the Turkish establishment is absolutely pro-NATO, 100% pro-NATO. This is something a lot of people in the West don't know, and a lot of people in the East also don't know. So that changes the game completely. This means that Erdogan, the AKP party, the leaders of the AKP, etc., they are pro-NATO, but at the same time, they know all the dangers inbuilt in being a part of NATO and with the second largest army inside NATO, because they know that the future is not NATO, the future is Eurasia. But they cannot openly embrace it because they are still part of NATO. So it's a tightrope walk. It's a very complicated thing to. I'm not sure even Erdogan knows how to do it. He plays by ear. He's not a strategist, of course. The strategist behind was Davutoglu. He's a former foreign minister and prime minister, and now he's a leader of an opposition party, a very small opposition party here. So there's no strategist explaining to Erdogan how to deal with it and integrating Turkey in the big story of the 21st century, which is Eurasia integration. So it's back and forth, and I'm sure what they these past few days was fantastic to follow. They said first, no, we're not going to close the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus. Then they said, yes, we're going to close it. We're going to close it to all warships. And when they did, they already knew that for Russia is not a big problem, because all the vessels that matter for Russia in the current circumstances are already in the Black Sea. And the vessels that are in the Eastern Mediterranean, they're going to stay there. It's not that Russia is going to move them from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Black Sea. They don't need it. Yeah. So it was a very clever decision. It was a little bit of judo played by the Sultan, which a lot of people here were actually startled. They said, wow, that was a good move.
Yeah, it was a bit cheeky, I must admit. I don't think the Americans are too happy about it. And I mean, in terms of Germany, right? We talked about Germany sending arms now to Ukraine and really just bending over backwards for NATO. What about Germany's gas dependency? Because Biden was very clear. He's saying this in front of the German Chancellor. We're going to end Nord Stream 2. Liz Truss, the UK Foreign Secretary, she's saying Europe must reduce its dependency on Russian gas. Today, Nord Stream AG, so this is the company based in Switzerland that belongs to Gazprom in Russia, which builds the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. They fired all the employees and they're declaring bankruptcy. What do you make of that?
Well, if this was a Kurosawa movie, this would be the last scene where the samurai commits seppuku. Only this time is a blonde, blue-eyed Nazi-style samurai committing seppuku, and he's suffocating and it's very cold because obviously there's no gas, so no heating, the whole shit, So this would be a fantastic Monty Python does Kurosawa kind of sketch,
Yeah.
Well, if they proceed like this, and considering the kind of government that they have at the moment, it's not going to change unless there is a political revolution in Germany, which is something that I don't see it coming, because the Germans respect authority coming from the top. They need even a mini Führer, and they will never revolt. So they are completely fucked, because even there are even absolute idiots saying that they should cancel Nord Stream 1, which is operating normally for years. The deliveries that were respecting contracts, Gazprom respects contract scrupulously. They are a very professional company. So where are they going to get their gas? They cannot get from Algeria. Algeria already said we don't have it. Norway already said we don't have it. They cannot get from Qatar because Qatar doesn't even have the vessels to deliver the gas to Germany. And Qatar already said, no, everything we have is already compromised, sold, etc. And they cannot get from what would be the perfect supplier, Turkmenistan, because they were stupid enough to visit Turkmenistan many times since the mid-2000s, to tell you the truth, and never managed to clinch a deal with Turkmenistan. The Chinese went to Ashgabat, and in one meeting, they clinched the deal, and they built a pipeline from Turkmenistan to Xinjiang, which proves once again that the so-called energy policy of the European Union does not exist. This is something that I saw for myself for many years when I used to cover Brussels closely. And I had this discussion with a lot of people, especially French, Belgians, and Germans. And they were complaining about Gazprom all the time. And then when I asked, okay, so what about your energy policy? We don't have one. We're still discussing it. 10 years discussing an energy policy with the multi-layered files, color-coded in multiple languages that nobody could understand.
Perfect bureaucracy.
Yeah, exactly. This is how Brussels works for all of you guys. This is how you spend one day over there and you understand everything about Kafka live, literally, So obviously there's nowhere they can get the gas that they need. And it doesn't matter that you have industrialists, especially from Northern Germany, from Hamburg, telling the government, look, if we don't have the gas that we need, it's goodbye to Germany as a big exporting nation, and even goodbye to Germany as the most important trading nation in the EU.
Right.
We'll be going down. We'll become what? We'll become a Poland, which is a non-country geopolitically and everything else, geoeconomically, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to pull up on the screen now the where Germany gets its gas from. I mean, people can see, 30 to 40% is coming from the Nord Stream 1 from Russia.
Pipeline gas, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, let's say that Nord Stream 2 is done. You were talking about in Mongolia, the Russians can just pull a switch and export the same amount to Eurasia, to other countries, so they won't lose any revenue from that.
No, and the craziest thing, Richard, is that in terms of Nord Stream 2 alone, Gazprom already recovered its costs. So Gazprom is not going to lose money because of Nord Stream 2. If the Germans cancel Nord Stream 2, they're going to be in deep shit inside Europe because they're going to have to pay gigantic fines to the consortium that was part of the construction of Gazprom and, in fact, coordinated the construction of Gazprom for European customers. So they're going to have to pay the Austrians, the Dutch, German companies, etc. Beyond money, once again, that they don't have. And in terms of Russia, in terms of Gazprom especially, they are sitting pretty because this week they started designing the pipeline that is going to connect Power of Siberia 2, which is practically ready, with the Chinese network in Xinjiang. And this is going through Mongolia. It's called the Soyuz Vostok pipeline, which they can do this in less than 2 years. So what's going to happen? When they have the whole thing ready, they use an interconnector and they pull the switch, and everything that is being delivered to Europe, Nord Stream 1 and eventually, probably never, Nord Stream 2, they switch to deliver to Power of Siberia 2. No problem at all. And of course, they already made the deals with the Chinese. This is already settled and payment has already started. Power of Siberia 2 is very important for the Chinese, as important as Power of Siberia 1. So and obviously there are other customers who are already saying, look, we want a piece of the action as well. South Korea, Japan, etc. So you can even build a Power of Siberia 3 in the next few years as well. So there's absolutely no problem from a Russian energy supplier point of view. The people who are committing seppuku are the Germans. Yeah,
it certainly looks that way. And I mean, if we go and look at this emergence of Eurasia, I mean, how long would this take? Because a lot of people think that sanctions, hitting the central bank, taking away Nord Stream 2, all of these various measures that they've taken in lockstep, that it's going to decimate Russia and coerce Russia into just abandoning, this police operation, as you called it, or as they called it, an invasion. Do you really think that that's going to deter Vladimir Putin? That's going to stop Russia from defending its interests?
No, first of all, Richard, this is not about Vladimir Putin. This is about the Russian leadership. So this means this is a compact of extremely competent and rational people. It includes Shoigu, Gerasimov, Patrushev, which is the equivalent of the head of the National Security Council, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lavrov, and a collection of absolutely extraordinary diplomats, some of the best in the world. So it's the Russian leadership as a whole. And of course, think tanks behind who have been giving roadmaps for Putin and the leadership for years now, including the concept of Greater Eurasia Partnership, which is very important. It's something that is never discussed in NATO-stan media, never. Right. Nobody even knows. Ask some asshole in the Times of London if he knows what is Greater Eurasia Partnership. Nobody knows. And this is the most important because this is the overarching concept for development from a Russian point of view and for Eurasia integration from a Russian point of view. Just as the Belt and Road has the same role for Chinese foreign policy. And the Russians had been thinking about that even before the Chinese came with the concept of the New Silk Road. Even since 2007, at least, when Putin had that famous Munich Security Conference speech where he said that the unipolar days are over, essentially. And that was a major scandal, of course, but nobody listened to what he said. And he was already predicting that, okay, if you don't listen to me, this is going to be hardcore. And that's where we are now. So this should have been prevented way back in 2007. Yeah. Well, the Russians were saying at the time, end of the 2000s, we would like to have a free trade area from Lisbon to Vladivostok, which essentially is what the Chinese, years later, wanted to do and codified. The Chinese expansion from Xinjiang towards Central Asia and towards West Asia, and then ended up in Europe, is the Chinese version of an original Russian idea. And then the Russians, years later, they codified this concept of Greater Eurasia Partnership, which is, you can say that it's a sort of rival concept to the New Silk Roads, but at the same time, it intersects with the Chinese concept, because the main thrust of the whole project is Eurasia integration with Russia's neighbors across Eurasia, but that does not exclude Western Europe. And Lavrov, many times these past 2 or 3 years especially, have been saying, look, the Europeans are invited to participate in our idea as well. This will imply, of course, closer commercial trade relationships between Russia and the European Union. And of course, most importantly, a closer Russia-Germany partnership. So when the Americans got hold of it, obviously, because this is the #1 anathema in terms of preserving the rules-based international order, prevent by all means closer relationships between Germany and Russia. For the moment, Richard and all of you, the Americans are winning. We can say that. They achieved one of their top objectives. Now they created a new iron wall between the European Union and Russia, and especially between Germany and Russia. We don't know if this thing is going to last, of course. Maybe it could last only a few months or 1 year or 2 or 3, and then it's over. And then the Europeans, not the Europeans, I would say, we cannot trust them. But we can trust some Germans to say, no, that's enough. Because we are sacrificing ourselves for foreign interests. And from a German point of view, this is absolutely not admissible. It could happen, you know, but for the moment, short term, it's an American victory. There's no question. They wanted to cancel Nord Stream 2, they're going to get it. They wanted to separate Germany and Russia, they are getting it. They wanted to create a Russophobia all across the European Union and prevent the Russians to trade with practically all of them. They are getting it. But remember history, nothing is forever.
Yep.
It can change at any minute and with any new inflection, especially if people wake up. So, but the Russians are preoccupied with that. No, Greater Eurasia Partnership basically is across Eurasia. So that's it. So we're going to have Russia much more involved with their Asian, Eurasian, Central Asian, West Asian, Southeast Asian, South Asian, India, and Pakistan at the same time. Russia has good relations with both India and Pakistan. India is not sanctioning Russia. Pakistan is not sanctioning Russia. Iran is not sanctioning Russia. Turkey is not sanctioning Russia. That's it. This is the real world. It's not a bunch of fucking psycho freaks in Europe. The real world is not the West. The real world, 80% of the world, is the global South. The global South, Eurasia, lots of parts of the global South are inside Eurasia, and they are not condemning Russia. This means that they diplomatically and politically, they understand the motives because they did a little bit of background. They understood why Russia is acting like this. And of course, you can have Lavrov pick up the phone and explain this to the Pakistani Prime Minister, to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in India, the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Iran, etc. Yeah, that's the difference. There is dialogue. It's important, and they tried everything with the Europeans in terms of dialogue, everything we can possibly imagine. And obviously, end of last year in December, they finally, it was the famous when the bear wakes, when the bear loses its patience, beware. That's it. Since December, the bear is awake and he's not happy. Yeah. So the first thing the bear did was very diplomatic. Okay, here's our list of demands to have, and this is the key term that you never see mentioned anywhere in Western mainstream media: indivisibility of security. It's the key of the letters that they sent to Washington and to Brussels, to NATO. And obviously, they didn't read it. It took them more than a month to reply. The reply was completely stupid, etc. and the Russians say, okay, this is the response to your response. There's still some openings. Let's try to get point by point. But this is the list of our demands. It's a list. You cannot pick what you want, cherry pick what you want. No, that's it. And if you say no, it's a no to everything that you ask, and we're going to act accordingly. Acting accordingly includes the police operation. It's not limited to the police operation, because after the police operation in Ukraine, there's a much more serious issue to deal with, which is the nuclearization of Eastern Europe, which means these military bases in Poland and Romania capable of stationing missiles with nuclear warheads. And Russia they are going after those. There's absolutely no question about that. And then this is a frontal Russia-NATO clash. So this is the next step. And Russia already warned, look, we warned you. You didn't listen to us. So that famous expression, military technical measures, is now being implemented in Ukraine and will be implemented later on in Eastern Europe. So that's it. Basically, this is it. You poke the bear for years, and especially the past 8 years, non-stop. The bear was always slumbering, but he was always saying, okay, let's talk, let's have a conversation. You didn't listen. Now it's too late, man. Have you ever been facing a bear in the middle of the Siberian forest? This is how it looks like. And that's why the headless chickens are desperate. Because they never saw a bear in action, and now they're seeing a bear in action. Over there. Just look at them over there to your east. How does it feel? So that explains to a large extent the panic atmosphere, especially in Europe. I would say the hysteria at the moment is even more developed in Europe than in the US or Canada.
It's incredible.
They are completely hysterical all across the EU, especially in Brussels, because they are, first of all, it's a bunch of absolutely mediocre people who they don't qualify to run a bratwurst stand in Berlin or in Vienna, for that matter. It's much more complicated to run a proper bratwurst stand, as you know, in Vienna, Richard. So these people are beyond mediocre. Can you imagine them having to deal with the Russian armed forces, with Shoigu, with General Gerasimov, with Putin, with Lavrov? Because can you imagine? Every time we have Blinken and Lavrov together, it's so embarrassing.
It's such a joke
to
really.
See a high school nullity even trying to utter a sentence that makes sense in front of Lavrov. That's so. No wonder they are all in panic. No wonder.
Yeah, I mean, I just quickly put up your tweet about Baerbock, the German foreign minister, who you said she can't even manage a bratwurst stand. That really killed me. She looks hilarious doing the catwalk there in the attire.
The catwalk was quite something. This was wow. Yves Saint Laurent, we never thought about that.
No, but I must agree with you about Blinken and Lavrov. Lavrov, Jafari, Zarif, these guys, they're old school, long time career.
Old school pros.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, you can't even compare. And I mean, it's just really interesting because I know we both talked about this extensively, but just in the last few minutes, you really, went to the heart of the issue, which they leave out in the media because they want to make it about it's Vladimir Putin, it's an individual, exactly. And they try to remove the context, which is that this is Russia, this is a nuclear power, it's it's an enormous country, it's a permanent member on the UN Security Council, and they try to take the context away, but that's just completely ignorant, and that's how they sell it to people. And you mentioned India. We saw, first of all, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan. He was visiting Putin the day of the beginning of the operation, which signaled that we're not on board with this sanctions and vilifying Russia. What about India? India, most of its military equipment is from Russia, right? So their stance
is from Russia. They're going to buy S-400s. Historically, these past decades, it was very, very close. During the Soviet Union, it was close. And the Indians understand especially for instance, inside the BRICS, what Lavrov usually does, and or even Putin, what he usually does when they have BRIC meetings, is to get Xi and Modi together to see what they agree on and to smooth the edges, because obviously the Russians know by heart all the problems faced by Indians against Chinese.
Yeah.
And this then extrapolates to the bilaterals, etc. It's a very sophisticated diplomatic operation that is being conducted for years now, approximating the Chinese and the Indians inside the BRICS, and then later on in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well. So it's a multi-vector, multitasking operation instead, and the mediators are the Russians. So from the point of view of smoothing the edges between Russia and China, nobody can do it except Russia. And they have been investing on it for years now. And you see the results, short-term and long-term, in terms of now, for instance, no condemnation, and the fact that trade between Russia and India is going to keep increasing exponentially, in fact. And at the same time with Pakistan as well. So the Russians are, that's the level of competence of Russian diplomacy can be seen, as a fact that everybody in every region, they trust the Russians as interlocutors, and they trust Russians, and they trust the Russian word, which is the exact opposite of the non-agreement capable gang. So the Russians are trusted in Africa, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, across the Middle East, across Central Asia, etc. Because it's essentially because it's pro, Richard. It's very simple. Because it's pro, because they listen, because they are rational actors. They are not impulsive. Because everything they respect to, if they sign something, they respect to the letter, like the Gazprom with the energy deliveries to Europe. Everything is respected to the letter. So that's a completely different way of conducting diplomacy and applying the basic principles of civilized international relations.
Yeah, and I mean, just in terms of just if I could circle back to RT being completely banned and taken off. I don't know if can you still hear me? I think you should be.
Yes. I cannot see you, but I can hear you.
Well, I was just saying, in terms of RT being banned, you have all these journalists. Like, look at this, for example, over here. This is, I'm sure you know, Richard Engel from the corporate NBC.
This guy he's toxic.
Right. So he was advocating for, of course, the U.S. to stay in Afghanistan. And he's been saying that, the Russians, they have a convoy that should be taken out by NATO. We have also this one over here from, here's a tweet, right? So he's saying that the U.S. NATO could destroy the convoy that's a few miles from Kiev. I mean, you and I both know that there's now an opportunity for foreign fighters to go to Ukraine. How come these journalists aren't the first to sign up?
Because exactly. Why don't you put Richard Engel along with the Azov battalion guys and some neo-Nazis from Poland, etc., in the front line? Drop him near Kiev in the front line and let him meet the Chechens face to face. But these people are not journalists, Richard. We know that. In my case, come on, I am an old school foreign correspondent. I know most of